Hello and welcome everyone to yet another exciting live session from Simplilearn. They call it the patterns, they call it the pyramids, they call it with the name of a geometrical shape as well. Yes, this is definitely that one question that brings goosebumps to all those who enter into an interview hall. Today's live session is exactly about the same, the pattern programs in Java. We will discuss all the most frequently asked questions in the interviews based on the pattern programs in Java. Let us wait for an ample amount of time so that few more attendees can join us for this resourceful session. Now, before we begin, how about you subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so that you can stay updated with all the tech information that you need related to the current IT and upskill yourself based on latest industry level standards. Now, can I get a quick response from your end if we could begin with the session? Great. I can see a lot of responses. Now, let's quickly begin with our session. First of all, we will discuss the right angle triangle pattern. So basically, the right angle triangle star pattern looks something like this as it is shown on my screen. So to resolve this problem statement and print the pattern, we must assume that this particular star arrangement is made in the form of a matrix, where the first row has single star and the second row has 2 stars, third row has 3 stars, and so on. Now to execute this particular code, we might need 2 for loops. So the first for loop will be for printing the rows and the second one will be for printing the columns. Now let us execute a practical program and see how does it work. Don't worry about the codes that we will be executing here because I have formatted a draft about all the codes that I will be executing today, and that particular file will be attached in the description box below. So I think my screen is visible to all. On my screen, you can see the particular pattern, which is a right angle triangle star pattern. So as discussed before, we will have the first outer for loop, which will be for printing the rows. So inside the outer for loop, we have the second for loop, which we will be using for printing the columns. You can see I have defined the row value as 5, which means we will be printing the star pattern for 5 rows. And we have used a counter variable, which is I, which is assigned the value of 1, and the comparator operator is used here, which is I should be less than or equal to the number of rows declared, and followed by that we have a pre-increment operator, and once the condition is true, the control will be entered into the second for loop where we have the next counter variable, which is j. So we have assigned j is equals to 1, and the comparator operator, which is j should be less than or equal to I, which is the value here, which is in the outer for loop, and followed by that we have the pre-increment operator. Once the condition is true, the control will enter into the inside for loop and will print a star. So here, just let us assume that the value of I is 1 and the statement is true. So the control will enter into the second for loop and it will see the conditional operator here. So j is less than or equal to I. So value of 1 is less than or equal to 1 and the star will be printed. After that, we have the pre-increment operator. So here the j value will be incremented to 2. Now if we compare the values, 2 is not less than or not equal to 1. So the condition fails here. So it will not print a star again. It will come out of the inner for loop and it will see the next statement, which says it should print in the next line. Whereas in the inside for loop, you can see we just used print, not print in the new line. So it will come to the new line and go back to the for loop again, and the increment of I will be taken place and the same runs again. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So you can see that the program got successfully executed and the right angle triangle star pattern is printed successfully. Now let us go into the next type of program. So the next type of program is the inverted right angle triangle star pattern. So similarly, according to the previous example, we also consider this one in the form of a matrix. So you can see that in the first row, we have 5 stars. In the second row, we have 4 stars. Similarly, so on. Now, let us try to check out the code and learn how does it work and how to print the star pattern on our screen. We are back in the practical mode again. So the kind of pattern that we wanted to print is this one, which is a little bit similar to the previous one, but only thing it is inverted. So the code is pretty much the same, but the only changes that we need to do are related to the comparator operator. In the previous example, we chose that I should be less than or equal to 1, and in the next stage we used pre-increment operator. In here we are using a different one, which is pre-decrement, and inside the for loop we have the J comparator operator in the same way. So here we have declared the row value as 5, and inside the for loop we will equate the counter variable equals to rows, which is 5, and followed by that the comparator operator compares if the value of 5 is greater than or equal to 1, and followed by that we will use the pre-decrement operator. Once the condition is true, the control will enter into the inside for loop, and here the counter variable j is assigned to the value 1, and the condition is j should be less than or equal to I, and followed by that we have the pre-increment operator, which is plus plus j. So once the condition is true, it will print the value of a star, and followed by that it will again continue the loop. So here the for loop will work in the following way. Int I is equals to 5, I is greater than or equal to 1, which is true, and pre-decrement. So the condition is true, so the control will enter into the inside for loop, where it will again compare with value of j. J is equals to 1 and j is less than or equal to 5, and followed by that we have the post increment. So the control will enter inside the for loop and print a star, and followed by that in the next instance the value of j will be incremented to 2. So 2 is less than or equal to I, followed by that pre-increment, and in the next iteration it will print a star again. So this will continue until the condition is true. Once the condition fails, the control will exit the for loop and print in the next line. You can see that we have print in the new line here, which is unlike the print function which is inside the for loop. So this will continue until the statements are true. Now let us try to execute this program and see if the desired pattern will be printing or not. There. You can see that the program got successfully executed and the pattern which we desired for is printed on the screen. Now let us move ahead into the next type of pattern. So the next type of pattern is the arrow-shaped pattern, and this almost looks familiar to the previous two programs. The only difference is we have combined them together to form an arrow pattern. Now let us try to combine the previous two programs and print this. So now you can see on my screen we have our desired pattern which looks like an arrow. So as discussed before, we are trying to combine the two programs that we executed before. So the first half of the program is designed for the first half of the pattern, which is completely similar to our first program. So the second half of the pattern is from our second program. But the only difference here is we have considered the value of rows is row minus 1 because we don't want another extra row to be printing here in this way. So you can see if we used I value is equals to rows, then the pattern would be something like this. We will not have a pointed edge. So to get a pointed edge, we will use row minus 1 to get this pattern what we desired for. Now let us try to execute this program and print the output. Now let us enter the number of rows we want. Let's enter 5. So there you go. Let me expand my output screen. Yeah, there you go. We have the pattern which we desired for. And don't forget that we need to use row minus 1 in the next stage, which is the second half of the program. So this is how the arrow pattern is printed. Now let us move further and see the next type of pattern in our list. So in the next pattern, we have the right angle triangle, which is completely similar to the first one, but the hypotenuse is on the other side. As you can see, this is the difference between the first program and this program. So in the first program, we had the hypotenuse in this direction, and now we have the hypotenuse in the opposite direction. Now, similarly to the first program, we shall consider this one as well in the form of a matrix. So you can see, if we consider this pattern in the form of a matrix, we have 4 spaces followed by a star. Similarly, in the second row, we have 3 spaces followed by 2 stars. In the third one, we have 2 spaces and 3 stars, and so on. So the main point that we need to consider here is, first we need to print the spaces, followed by that we need to print the stars to get this pattern. Now let us execute a practical program and see the output. So back in the practical mode, you can see on my screen the desired pattern. What we are looking for is this. So here the only difference is we have to print the spaces first. So for printing the spaces, we will be using this for loop with the condition j is equals to 2 into n minus I, and j should be greater than or equals to 0, and j decrement, which is a post decrement operator. So what is the value of n? N is nothing but the value of rows. So the value of n is declared in the main function, and n is equals to 5. After that, we will be calling the print stars function, which is over here, and the value of n will be carried over here, and then the counter variables I and j will take care of the for loops. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So you can see that the program is successfully executed and the desired pattern is printed successfully. So this for loop will be run until the condition is true. Once this for loop fails, we will enter into the next for loop, which is particularly designed to print the stars. Now after this, let us move ahead into our next type of pattern. So the next type of pattern is an inverted right angle triangle pattern, which is opposite to the second type of program that we dealt with. Now similarly, let us consider this in the same way as we considered all the other programs, that is in the form of a matrix. So here we have 5 stars in the first row, 4 stars in the next one, and 1 space. Followed by that we have 2 spaces, followed by that we have the 3 stars, and 3 spaces, 2 stars, and so on. Now let us see a practical program and try to print this particular pattern. So we are back in the practical mode, so you can see that the desired star pattern is this, and it is completely similar to our previous pattern. So the only difference is we tried to print spaces first in the earlier pattern, and here we are trying to print the stars first. So that's the only difference. And we have the same for loops. So the first for loop is for rows and it will print spaces, and the second for loop is for stars, which will print the stars. As you can see, we have the row values and the column values here as the comparator operator, and we have the comparator operator which finds if j is greater than I. In the first case, the loop will fail because the value of j and I are completely similar, because we have declared I is equals to rows in the first outer for loop and same j is equals to rows in the second inner for loop. So obviously the condition has to fail and it will not print any space here. It will directly enter into the next for loop and will print the star pattern, and followed by that we will enter into the next line. So this for loop will print the number of stars in the first row according to the row number. For example, if we give 5 as the row number, then it will print 5 stars in the first row, and it will exit the for loop and it will enter into the next line, and the same pattern will be continued. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let us give 5 as the number of rows needed. So there you go, you can see the star pattern here. So this is how this particular star pattern will be generated. Now let us move further and check out the next type of pattern program in our list. So the next type of pattern program in our list is arrow. So this arrow is completely similar to the previous one. The only difference is it is in the inverted way, which is it is pointed towards the left side. Now let us check out the practical program and learn how to execute this. Back onto Eclipse IDE. So you can find some similarities between the previous two programs and this particular program. In the previous two programs, we tried to print the first half of the pattern, and followed by that we have printed the second half of the pattern. Now we are going to just combine both the programs and print this particular arrow pattern. So here the first half of this particular program is concerned with the top portion of this pattern, which is the right angle triangle. Followed by that the second half of the program where we have the conditions placed. So this particular segment of the code takes care about the second half of the program, which is the inverted right angle triangle. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So let us specify the number of rows as 5, completely similar to the previous two programs. Now let's press enter. Now there you go. Let me expand my console. So there you go. You can see the arrow pattern. So this is how you print an arrow pattern pointing towards the left side. We have also discussed an arrow pattern where the arrow will be pointing towards the right side as the program number 3. Again, don't worry about the codes. All the programs that I'm going to execute in this session are drafted in the form of a text document, and that is linked in the description box below. You can take that source file and practice the programs for yourself. Don't worry. Now let's move ahead and check out the next type of program. So the next type of pattern that we have in our list is the pyramid. We also call this an acute angled triangle star pattern. Now let us understand the logic for this. Now you can see without the matrix format, this looks completely similar to our first program, but only the difference is we have a space, which is obvious, but there is a small difference. Let us check out what's the difference is. If we look this program in the form of a matrix, you can see there are variations in spaces. In the first row, we have 2 spaces, 1 star, followed by that again 2 spaces. In the next row, we have alternate space and star, space and star, and similarly in the third row we have a star, space, star and space. So this is how the matrix continues according to the number of rows provided. So let us understand how the logic exactly works for this program. Okay, so you can see the pattern that we desired is in the form of an acute angle triangle or pyramid. Now we have 2 counter variables, which is I is equals to 0 in the outer for loop and j is equals to n-1, which is inside the for loop. So the value of n is equals to 5, which is the total number of rows that we needed in our particular pattern. Now you can see in the outer for loop we have the condition, which is I should be less than n. So I should be less than the number of rows, which is equals to 5. Followed by that we have the post increment operator I++. So the condition will be true because 0 is less than 5, and it will enter into the inside for loop where we have j, which is equals to 5 minus 0. Followed by that we have the condition. So 5 is greater than 1. So the resultant of this particular statement is 5. So 5, which is now the value of j, is greater than 1. Followed by that we have the post decrement operator, which will decrease the value of j in every iteration. So once the statement is true, it will try to print a space. So it will print the spaces until the condition is true. So once the first for loop fails, the control will enter into the next following for loop where we have j is equals to 0 and j should be less than or equal to the value of I, which is currently equals to 0, and followed by the conditional statement we have the post increment operator, which is J++. So this particular for loop is used for printing two things, which is the first one, star, followed by that we have a space. So once this for loop gets executed, the control will exit it and will print in the new line. So this is how the program works. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. There you go. The program got successfully executed and the required spaces and the stars have been printed here. So as you can see, we have spaces, followed by that we have a star. Similarly, spaces onto the left, a star, and the second star. So followed by the previous program, we have the next program, which is also considered to be like a pyramid, but the only difference is it is in an inverted format. Now let us check out the logic behind this program and try to execute a practical program. So logic wise, it's completely similar to the previous one. We have star, followed by that we have a space, and again a star, space, and a star. Next row we have alternate space and star, and finally we have two spaces, star, and two spaces. So the number of spaces and stars is based upon the number of rows we provide. Now let us try to execute a program and see the output. Don't worry, this is completely similar to the previous one, but the only difference is it is printed in the inverted fashion. So there will be minor changes to the code. Let's try to look on those changes. So here we are back in Eclipse. So the desired pattern is here, which is an inverted pyramid, and the previous program was a regular pyramid. So here is the logic, and we have the following for loops. So the first for loop is dedicated for printing the number of spaces we require. So inside the exterior for loop, we have the counter variable I is equals to 0, and I should be less than or equals to the number of rows minus 1, and followed by that we have the post increment operator I++. So let us assume that we have provided the number of rows to be 5, and according to the logic, I is equals to 0, and followed by that 0 is less than or equals to 5 minus 1, which is 4, and followed by that we have the post increment operator, which will increment the value of I to 1 once after the for loop first iteration is finished. So once the exterior for loop condition is true, the control will enter into the second for loop, which is the internal for loop, and we have the second counter variable, which is j is equals to 0, followed by that the comparator operator, which says j should be either less than or equal to the value of I. Followed by that we have the post increment operator on j. So this particular code segment, or the first part of the program, takes care about the number of spaces we require in our pattern. Followed by that we have the second for loop, which will take care of the number of stars we print and the number of spaces we require after the star pattern. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let us provide the number of rows we need. Let's provide the value as 5. Now there you go. According to the logic provided in the program, the star patterns are successfully generated, followed by the spaces. Now moving ahead, we have the next type of pattern, which is the combination of first and second pyramids. Now let us understand the logic and print this pattern. Now you can see the desired pattern is the combination of the first pyramid and the second pyramid. So the first half of the program is derived from the first pyramid pattern, and the second part of the program is derived from the second pyramid pattern. Now we have combined them together, and now we are trying to print the rhombus pattern. Now let's try to execute this program and see the output. Let us provide the number of rows as 5, and there you go. So here you can see the desired star pattern has been successfully executed. So according to the input, we have the first 5 rows, and followed by that we have the inverted star pattern, where we avoided the first row and printed the following 4 rows, so that we have a proper Rubik's pattern. Now moving ahead, we shall see the next type of pattern in our list. So followed by the previous pattern, we have the next type of pattern, which looks completely similar to the previous one. But the only difference is we have printed the second type of pyramid first and then the first type of pyramid, which makes it look like an hourglass. Now let us understand the logic and print this pattern. So here is the desired pattern what we are looking for, and this was the previous pattern what we printed. Now followed by the first segment, we have the second segment which is dedicated to print the second half of the pattern, which happens to be the first type of pyramid, which is a regular pyramid. But the only difference is inside the first for loop we are using the rows -1 command because we don't want an extra star. So if we add in an extra star, this pattern will look a little abnormal. So let us try. So this is what it looks like if we had an extra star there. So let us remove it. So this is how our pattern should look like. So that's the reason why we are using row -1 here. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let us enter the number of rows we want. Let us input 5. Enter. So there you go. You can see the program got successfully executed and the desired star pattern has been printed on the console. Now let us move further and have a look on the next type of pattern in our list. So followed by the hourglass pattern, we have the next pattern where we need to print a diagonal star pattern. Now if we look at the logic, it's just a single line which is placed in the form of a diagonal. Now let us check the logic behind it. So you can see we have printed stars in the form of a diagonal of a matrix. Now we have the first 4 spaces, followed by that we have a star, and similarly 3 spaces provided by a star, then a space, and so on. Now to print this pattern, what's the logic? Let's go back to Eclipse and try to print this program. So this is our desired pattern. Now let us go into our program. Now inside the program we have 2 counter variables, which are one I, 2 is j. So the first for loop is I is equals to 1, I is less than or is equals to 5, which is the row number, then I post increment. So when the logic is true, which is 1 is less than or equal to the row number 5, the control will enter into the second for loop. So once the control enters into the outer for loop, we have the second for loop where we have our second counter variable, which is j. J is equals to 0 and j is less than 5 minus I, which is 5 minus 1, which is the current value of I, which is 4. So 0 is the value of j currently. So 0 is less than 4. Followed by that we have the post increment on j counter variable. So once the condition is true, the control will enter into the second inner for loop and will print space. So this loop will run until the condition is true. Once the condition fails, it will come out of the inner for loop and will print a star in the new line. Followed by that, it will continue to start the outer for loop again. So this is how the flow goes ahead. Now let's run the program and see the output. So you can see the program got successfully executed and the desired pattern is printed. Now let's move ahead and understand the next type of pattern in our program. So the next type of pattern is a little bit similar to the previous one. So in the previous pattern we had one diagonal. Right now we have 2 diagonals which have formed the shape of X. So we can consider this as an X pattern. Now let us check out the logic, and next after that let's execute the program. So according to the logic, when we consider this particular pattern in a form of a matrix, we have the stars printed in the first row, followed by that we have 3 spaces and then again a star. So this is continued in the same way with alternate spaces, and in the third row we have a single intersection point with 1 star. So this is how the pattern should look like once the program gets executed. Now let us check out the program and see the output. So you can see on my output console, this was our previous pattern. Now what we are going to do is make a similar pattern in the opposite direction and make sure they intersect each other. Now you can see our program has 2 segments, the first segment and the second segment. They both look a little similar because the first segment will print the upper part of the pattern, that is the first V, and then the second segment will print the lower part of the pattern, which is the inverted V. Now let us check out the condition. We have the first outer loop which has the first counter variable, which is I is equals to n. N is nothing but the number of rows that we want in our pattern. Then I should be greater than or equal to 1. Followed by that we have the post decrement operator where we will decrease the value of I. Then if the condition is true, then the control will enter into the next statement where we have the inner for loop with second counter variable, that is j is equals to I. Then the condition is j should be less than the value of rows provided. Then post increment of j, and if the condition statement is true, then it will enter into the inner for loop and it will print a space. Similarly, for printing the star, we have the next segment. Inside the next segment, the condition is a little trickier because we don't want to print any stars in the space between the X pattern. We provide this condition where j is equals to 1 and j should be less than or equals to 2 times the value of I, which is the outer for loop, minus 1. If this condition is true, the control will enter inside the for loop where we have if else condition. If j is equals to 1 or j is equals to 2 into I minus 1, then we should print a star, else we should print a space. So this will print the upper part of the pattern, and similarly we have another segment which will print the lower part of the pattern, which is the inverted V pattern. Now let's execute this program and see the output. As you can see, the program got executed. Now let us provide the value of n. Let us provide 5, and there you go. You can see that the program printed the desired pattern. So this is the first half of the pattern, which is the proper V. Then this is the second half of the program, which is the inverted V. So this is what the flow of the program is. Now let us move further and check out the next pattern in our list. So the next pattern in our list is the inverted V pattern. Now let us check out the logic behind it. If you see this in the form of a matrix, then you can recognize this. We had already discussed similar program, which was the third one, where we had printed the pyramid shape. But the only difference is we have missed out the star in between, which makes it look like a inverted V. Now let us go back to Eclipse and execute a program based on this to print this pattern. As you can see, we have our desired pattern on my screen, which is an inverted V. So if we check out the logic, we have outside loop and inside loop. So we have two for loops. So the first outer for loop has out is equals to 1. Out should be less than or equals to the number of row size, then post increment of outside variable. If the condition is true, we enter into the inner for loop where we have inner loop is equals to 1. Inner loop should be less than or equals to the row size into 2. Then we have increment operator, which is a post increment. So if this particular condition is true, then we enter into another statement where we have the if else statement. So if in value is equals to control X or in is equals to print control Y, then we should print star, else we should print a space. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let us provide the row size, which is 5. So as you can see, we have got our desired pattern. Now let us move ahead and execute the next type of pattern, which is the V pattern. Now let us understand the logic behind it. It is completely similar to the previous program, but the difference is the pattern is in inverted position to the previous one, which is in the proper V format. So now let us try to check out the code and execute the program and print the pattern. So on my screen, you can see the desired pattern what we are looking for, which is V. Now the previous program was to print an inverted V. So the complete program is same, but only there is a minor change in the logic where we have replaced I as greater than or equals to 0. And there is some change in the second segment as well. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So you can see the program got successfully executed and the desired pattern is printed here. The value of n or row size is equals to 5, which we have declared here in the main part. Now let us get back and check out the next pattern to be executed in our list. So the next pattern is the combination of both an inverted V and a normal V, which will result in the form of a rhombus. Now, as you can see, this is our previous program. Now we have two segments in our code, where we have the first segment to print the starting or the top position, which is an inverted V format, and the second segment of the code is designed to print the second half of the pattern, which is the normal V pattern. So we will combine these two and print the rhombus shape. Now let me provide the number of rows, which is 5. So there you go. You can see the desired pattern. Now let us move ahead and check out our next pattern. So the next pattern is completely similar to one of the previous ones, which is a pyramid pattern. But the difference is this pyramid is hollow, or in other words, this looks like an acute angled triangle. Now let us understand the logic behind it. So if you look at this matrix, then you can find that we are going to print the stars in the form of a side of the triangle, which is we will print the stars in the shape of a triangle and nothing inside the matrix. Now let us understand the program and print this pattern. So as you can see, the desired pattern is being located here, which is a triangular pattern. Now inside this, we have three particular for loops. So the first for loop is the outer for loop, and the rest two for loops are the internal for loops. So the first internal for loop is dedicated to print spaces where we don't require stars. And the second internal for loop is dedicated to print stars where we require them. Also we have an if-else condition which decides where to print a star and where not to. Now if we look at the condition, I should be less than or equal to the number of rows provided, and if the condition is true, then we enter into the internal for loop. And in the internal for loop, if j is less than the number of rows given, then in that particular location we need to print a space. Once the condition in the first for loop is failed, the control will enter into the next for loop where we have the next counter variable, that is k is equals to 1, and k should be less than or equals to 2 into I minus 1, where the value of I is 1 at the current stage, and followed by that we have the post increment of the value of k. If k is equal to 1, or I is equal to the number of rows, or k is equal to 2 star I minus 1, then we should print a star. So this will give the location in the matrix where we should print star to make it as a triangle pattern. If location is anything else than the condition provided, then we should be printing space there. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Let us provide the number of rows as 5. So there you go, we have printed the desired pattern. So the next pattern after the triangle pattern is the box pattern. So this particular program will be completely similar to the previous program. The only difference is we need to find the locations where we need to print stars so that the resultant pattern looks like a box. So for that we will make some changes in our program, and those changes will be related to the rows and columns. Now let us understand the logic. So as discussed before, we need to look at this pattern in the form of a matrix and check out the number of rows and columns. So where the number of row and column are equal, we need to print a star. So let us now check out the program and execute the program to print this particular pattern. So as you can see on my screen, we have the same program that we used to print the triangle, but now here we have rows and columns. So n is nothing but the row and m is nothing but the column. So if the value of the external for loop, that is I is equals to 1 and I is equals to the number of rows provided, similarly j is equal to 1, which is the internal for loop counter variable value, and if j is equal to m, that is the column value, then we should print a star in that particular location, and wherever the location does not match, we should provide a space. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So there you go, we have our desired pattern, which is the box pattern. Now let us move ahead and check out the next type of pattern in our list. So you can see the next pattern is completely similar to our first pattern. The first pattern was our right angled triangle. Now we have the same right angled triangle, but the only difference is we have used numbers here. Now we will use the numbers from our for loops, and we will print the same values in our pattern so that it looks like a right angled triangle. Now let us understand the logic. So we will see this pattern in the form of a matrix. Now we will print the numbers where we require them. Where we don't require the numbers, we will print spaces. Now let us check out the program and execute it to print the following pattern. Now you can see we have got back to our same program, but the only difference is here we are using the values of the inner for loop, which is j, instead of a star. Previously we used star symbol here, and we are now replacing it with the inner for loop value. Let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let us enter the number of rows as 5, and there you go. We have the values of the internal for loop, making the pattern look like a right angle triangle pattern. Now let us move further and check out on our next type of pattern in the list. So here is another right angle triangle in our list, but the difference is we are using the numbers in a continuous manner, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 15. This type of triangle is also called as Floyd's triangle. Now let us understand the logic. So similar to the previous one, we will consider this in the form of a matrix, and we will print the numbers only where we require them, that is to form a right angle triangle. Where we don't need the numbers, we will try to print a space there. Now let us check out the program and execute it and print this pattern. Now you can see we have got back to Eclipse, and don't get scared about the pattern. It's completely similar to the previous one. Only thing is we will be using one extra counter variable, which is k. So we have provided the value of k is equals to 1, and where we are supposed to print stars, we will add the post increment operator to the counter variable k. So whenever the for loop gets executed, we will be printing the values of k, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So there you go, the values of k, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 until 15. So this is how the Floyd's triangle works. Now let's get back and check out the next pattern in our list. So the next pattern in our list is similar to the previous one, which is pyramid. So this type of pyramid is also called as Pascal's triangle. Now let us check out the logic. The logic is completely similar to the pyramid's logic, but instead of star, we are going to use numbers. So this type of triangle is called as Pascal's triangle, and the logic is also a little bit different from the regular pyramid. Let us understand the logic through the code. So now you can see the program on my screen. So the logic and the for loops used are completely similar to that of the pyramid, but only the difference is we are going to print the value of number. So the number is firstly initialized as 1, followed by that we have a formula for that, which is number is equals to number into I minus j divided by j plus 1, which are the values of the counter variables of outer for loop and inner for loop respectively. Now let's try to execute this program and see the pattern. So you can see the program got successfully executed and the Floyd's triangle has been successfully constructed here. Now let us move ahead and check out the next pattern in our list. So the next pattern in our list is a box which is made up of binary numbers. Now let us understand the logic for it first. So if we look at this in the form of a matrix, we have binary numbers 1 and 0, which forms the pattern of a box. Now let us check out the program and execute the program to print this particular pattern. So you can see on my screen we have the program to print that particular box type of pattern using the binary numbers. So we have the external for loop for rows, and the counter variable I is equals to 1, and I should be less than or equal to the number of rows provided. Once the condition is true, we enter into the external for loop where we have the number, and where we have the condition I modulus 2 is equals to 0 and the number is equals to 0. And inside that we have our logic to print the binary numbers. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. Now let me place the number of rows as 5, and there you go. We have our box pattern using binary numbers. Now let us get back and check the next pattern in our list. So the next pattern is the Ruby pattern. This is completely similar to our program where we printed the Ruby pattern using the stars. Now we'll use the numbers and print that particular pattern. Now the logic for this is completely same that of the Ruby pattern we used, but the only difference is instead of a star, we'll be placing the value of the counter variables. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So there you go, the program got successfully executed, and instead of stars, we have printed the Ruby pattern using the numbers. Now moving ahead, we have our next pattern. So here, the next pattern is completely similar to the first one, which is the right angled triangle pattern, but here, instead of numbers or stars, we will be using alphabets. So for alphabets, we will be using the ASCII values in the program. Let us check out that program soon. Now, first let's understand the logic. The logic is also completely similar to the right angled triangle, which we followed for stars and numbers. Now, let's check out the program. So as you can see, the desired pattern is the right angled triangle made out of alphabets. So the logic is completely true, but the only difference is we are going to print characters using ASCII values and alphabet function. Now let us try to execute this program and see the output. So the desired pattern is the right angled triangle printed using the alphabets. Now the logic is completely similar to the right angled triangle pattern, but the only difference is we are going to use the ASCII values. So we have declared an integer type variable alphabet with the ASCII value 65, which should start the alphabets from capital A, because the ASCII value of capital A is 65. Now let us run the program and see the output. So there you go, the program got successfully executed and we have the right angled triangle printed using the capital alphabets. Now let's get back and check out our next pattern. So our next pattern is a pyramid again. So instead of numbers and stars, we are going to use the alphabetical values. Now let's check out the logic. Even here you can see the logic is similar to the pyramid logic. Now let's check out the code and execute the code and see the pattern. Now you can even see the logic is also similar to the pyramid logic, but here the only difference is we are going to use the ASCII value, that is 65, which is equivalent to capital A. Now in the print statement, instead of a star, we are going to print the alphabets, and this particular for loop is for spaces. Now let's quickly execute this program and see the output. So there you go, the pyramid pattern has been successfully printed. So with this, we have come to an end of this particular session. If you have any queries regarding this session, or if you have any suggestions for us, then please feel free to drop them down in the comment section below. Also, if you require any code regarding the programs that we executed in this particular session, then you can find the document in the description box below. Till then, thank you. Until next time.